Call City Council special meeting to order. What's the date today? Sorry.
June 7th.
June 7th, 2022 at 4:31. So I'll rise for the flag salute, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Get a roll call, please.
Councilmember Scheer.
Present, online.
Councilmember Gruber. Councilmember Weiss.
Here.
Councilmember Cook. Here. Councilmember Brodeen.
Present.
Councilmember Uren.
Here.
And Councilmember Adams.
Present.
And Mayor House.
Here. Okay, so we have no consent agenda or anything, it's just this. So, Michelle, do you want to start, or are we going to have Mark?
Well, I will start. So I don't know if you guys all read the email that I sent out, but Ecology would like us to, once we actually publish a final draft, do an additional 14-day comment period. So we've done our 14-day comment period on this one. They would like us to do, it's not actually, it's open to interpretation, I guess. In my mind, I guess we should just do it to cover all of our bases. But what it means is we're not going to make the June 14th deadline. So we have to decide. It would mean that we would have it adopted by the end of the month, or that very first part of July, depending on how days fall and when we can schedule a special meeting, or if you guys just want to do it at a regular meeting. If we extend the moratorium, it's in 6-month increments, but we would just lift it as soon as we adopted it. It would be lifted, so it would be an extension of like 2 weeks, basically. Or we just let it play out. And then just continue with our adoption. The risk that you run is then you could get applications in that 2-week window, basically, that might fall under the old code. So something to think about. We don't have to decide that right now, because it wouldn't be till June 14th that we would extend it. So we don't have to decide that right this second. Other than that,
I would like to say that I feel that we would get applications in that 2-week period because people have been waiting. So I think, everybody would just apply. And so having 2 different kinds of code kind of ruins what we're doing right here. So I would suggest
we did the moratorium on, I'm sorry.
Oh, that's fine.
Just when we did the moratorium on vacation rentals, there was like a 2-day window between the end, and people were, at least one person got in on the old code, and it was, so that kind of backs up what you're saying. That's all I'm agreeing with you.
Like she said, we don't have to vote tonight. But.
yeah. So I mean, we can think on that, but I guess my recommendation, just to cover all the bases, would be it's not going to hurt. It's 14 more days. OTAC says that they can have this out. Whatever comes out of this meeting tonight. She said she thought she could have the final draft to me still by the end of this week, so we can still hold our public hearing. We'll still do all of that. We can even have a 3rd public hearing, I guess, if we decide to extend that moratorium. We will, I guess, something to think about. Other than that, I think I made kind of just a spreadsheet. I think there's some stuff we're just going to have to exclude from this update. It's just, I don't think it's feasible to get it all in there the way we want it, I guess I should say. We could get it in there, I'm just not sure it's what we actually want. So we can go ahead and go through that tonight. I just printed out a copy because I can't even keep track anymore. I've got about 15 drafts of this.
Thank you for printing them out.
Yeah.
So what I did not incorporate, so this is the last draft that OTAC gave us. Planning Commission has had their meeting since then, and I still have those notes, and OTAC also has those notes. What I didn't do is I didn't have her create another draft. I didn't see much point in spending the time to just create another draft and spend the money when we still have to create a final draft anyway. So these guys will be able to talk about and fill you in on all of that, and then I've got all of the notes from that meeting as well. So, but however you guys want, I don't know how you guys want to start. If you want to have them start or you start, I guess that's.
Yeah, why don't you guys go ahead?
As soon as we figure out what we're doing, we'll do it. You just want Michelle, do you just want us to go kind of line by line again, like we've been doing? Or highlight the...
Yeah, we can, I mean, you can kind of highlight it. I don't know, I guess here at the last council meeting, there was some items that came up after, then that was after their review. So I don't know if you guys want to start with those. I will say that, the height discussion came up at the last council meeting, that we're not we're not even gonna address that in here. The other thing was the significant trees, and I think that, there was a consensus that we could eliminate that with the intent that these guys are definitely gonna draft language right away that we can adopt, unless that's changed. The other one that's the big ticket item is the parking and loading standards. I don't know if we're all the way there yet. Justin's done some incredible work on that. I don't know if we're all in agreement yet, or if that's one we should kinda just adopt separately as well and just leave it as it is for now. I don't know, that's what this is for tonight, I guess, so. So you can do it, I mean, we can start with just this, I mean, I don't know if we need to go through line by line unless you guys really want to. It's up to you.
No, we've spent a lot of time, they spent a lot of time, and I think there's a lot that we just don't even need to go over on the line by line. I think we find the real issues and we discuss them.
Yeah, or the things you've changed that are significant.
Yep, go right to the work and skip all the other.
Well, let's tackle the big things.
Yep.
Do we address parking now? Or do we put it on timeout and with a deadline of our to-dos in the very near future? How would the council like us to address this?
I think if the goal is to get the basic draft and then most of it done, and I think to have time to go through the parking work that's been done would be a better thing, a better approach, is my opinion. But, so put the parking on the timeout.
Yeah,
You
the
guys-
separate
I mean,
fees.
if that makes sense.
Okay.
Because rather than, I think we'd be going over it really fast and we might not get to other stuff to actually get a draft,
Okay.
you know, done.
I think I should also ask the parking czar what he thinks.
Yeah.
I'm here at the pleasure of the mayor and council. So whatever they want to do.
My only concern is that I thought, I could be wrong, I thought that was identified as one of the major issues that was causing difficulties that even caused the moratorium.
So
So if it's not addressed, will that cause difficulties in the interim as things are submitted and what have you?
So the things that, the items specifically, beyond the fact that it's a little bit hard to meet the requirements in there, were, hold on just a second, let me get to it. It is, so in the 18.130 point, I think it's just in the general, so it's 18.130.010, so it's page 52 of 83 on that document that you guys have, that it doesn't actually have 83 pages anymore. It is, the parking standards set out in this chapter are intended to, so,
Hold on.
Wait.
okay.
That's at the bottom of page 82, so that's what
Yep.
we've got here. So is
82
that
or
correct?
52?
52. Sorry.
52.
Thank you.
The two that the attorney had issue with that have caused some issues are A and B. So the recommendation was that those were more specific to either state protect the historic character, or protect the historic character, actually she wanted that one deleted, but promote the preservation and use of historic properties. She said either take that out or specifically, what do you want to protect? Because the entire city is a historic district. So are you trying to protect properties on the historic register, or are you trying to protect the entire? So those two are what caused some major issues.
When it says historic properties, is that lobby putting in all the empty lots just because it's in the historic
Well,
downtown? Because I look at that as a totally new separate bill, right?
That's
Like,
what became the issue.
and exactly, and I would say, you know, just my opinion is you look at the old existing buildings and those are that actual history, but I don't look as an empty lot as a historical site in the sense of new development for how parking and things go.
Yeah.
But maybe we change the word properties and that would take care of that. I
Yeah,
agree with
does that make sense? I mean,
Yeah.
because we really are focused on what's existing as our historical structures.
Right.
And we don't want to see backs of buildings lopped off for parking and things like that. So I think we would just want to separate that so the lots are actually new development. They're not labeled under a historical status of, hey, you get to do this because you have a historical status and we're stuck with no parking.
Michelle, the purposes are routinely outlined almost like, okay, this is why we're passing this, but they never really have any teeth or anything, or
Well, they did in our recent variance.
is she suggesting that that actually has meaning when you go
It
to
did.
enforce
It
those
was
things?
the total basis for the decision that was.
Why even have any purposes at all? We want to do
No, I
this.
agree.
I thought that was part of the discussion, that just all of these purposes were sort of vague and open to interpretation and left us exposed.
Yeah,
Right.
Was that-
we
that's
did, the planning commission,
Okay.
yes, yes.
For both sides?
So this is, yes, correct. So
So-
this is more council's,
A counter approach is, it actually, I mean, we're talking about the Comendo building, I think it's important to just kind of, that was the issue. There was a hearing, and the hearing officer did point those out, but in my perspective, it did protect that building. It was the only way that building could be used, is to kind of use that. And if we're trying to protect the buildings, and not the properties, that became an important part. I know we kind of disagree on this, but if we're trying to protect the buildings, we need something that protects the buildings. And I think this does.
I think it'll get really mixed if we try to separate which buildings, and, because obviously most of them are not under the registry, right? So then, you know, you come into somebody that buys one of the buildings and say one of them, or development, and, you know, how are we gonna tell them that, oh yeah, you don't have parking, so you're not gonna be able to do that business? When we need more e-commerce through downtown and more business, and
Well, there are 7 buildings on the register.
I don't understand how this protects the buildings. This is
Yeah, that's-
specific to
this
parking.
does not protect the
Oh,
building,
yeah.
this is too broad, so I mean, I
it
follow
needs to
what
be
you're
more
saying.
specific, for sure.
Yeah, we would have to be far more specific.
Yes.
This is in the parking code.
I understand that, but in this particular issue, for this particular
The
building,
parking, yeah.
that building, if there was, according to the hearing examiner, you know, this, to protect the building, he didn't say that, but to protect the building, you could only do 2 actual pieces of parking areas on the property. Otherwise, and they have to have parking, some kind of parking for people, and they wanted to open. So I'm not sure what would have happened to that building. It probably would have been an abandoned project.
Well,
And that, I think,
a
is a great
variance
loss.
would never require you to tear a building down, so this
Right.
variance was just for that use to not have to provide that much parking.
Correct.
Right.
So the parking doesn't necessarily have to be provided on the site, so that is a totally separate
Okay.
issue.
Yeah.
So that, in this case, the basis for the decision based on the fact that it was a historic property, although it's not on our historic register. And so that's what we need to, that's what the attorney wants narrowed down, is which are we trying to protect? Are we going to say that everything within the historic district, which is the entire city, or is it just properties on the historic register? Is it just existing buildings built during the period of significance? And that's what she wants to find in there. And you can do that one of 2 ways. You can state it here, or you could just define what historic structures are, for example. I mean, we can do it a couple of different ways. We just have to be very specific about what is, because what happens is further down, properties that are historic are exempted from all the requirements of this parking. And if we do that, then we've got,
No parking downtown whatsoever that changes.
well, potentially, I mean, yes.
Mhm.
That's the fear, I guess.
I like the existing structure, but that's just my opinion, that we would protect existing structures, because we obviously know that not all of them are in that time frame. Some are later, but I think we want to still, you know, the inland building, right, you know, the corner building, it's not a early 1900s building, but, you know, if somebody were to do something else with that, it should fall under the existing structure. I mean, that's just my input, you know, that I think it should fall under the existing structure, and it's protected that way, as it's in place, because they can't create more parking. That's just my thought.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
I think it makes sense, total sense. on
Yeah,
that
I mean, you
part.
can't go
But-
backward, make them go backwards to go forward, but
No.
even the pizza shop, that's a new building.
It's not an old
Because that
building.
replaces the building that burned down.
Mhm.
And we couldn't come in now, say, because you're a historic structure, you've gotta do this. I mean,
That
I think
building's
it
over
has
20
to
years
fall
old.
under the existing building clause. The raw lots, we have leverage over them.
Yeah.
We can have a pretty hard standard, and it's like, you know, if you have to dedicate half of your lot to parking, that's the way it is. I mean, whatever that standard is.
What if there were a natural disaster? I've always thought the last place I want to be in an earthquake is the brick, right? Let's just,
Or any downtown building.
yeah, let's just imagine, you know, the entire district's gone. Do we rebuild as it was with no parking, just give them an exemption because it's a historic property? Or do we say, well, you're more than X% over right now, you've got to comply with the code? How does that work?
I think we'd want to create a completely separate
Yeah.
line item
Yeah.
of
This is the whole
a
thing.
significant
Yeah.
impact like that.
Keep
That
the
would
facades right.
you have a reevaluation of how existing structures are
Solve the
placed,
loading
even though
issue
you
and
want the
everything.
faces and the facades and everything the same. That's just in my opinion, that you'd want to sort of have a separate clause to protect that if something were to happen.
Yeah.
And that separate clause could also be like leveraged and be merged, the difference between property and structure, and focus on the, not the plat, but
Like the foundation or the
exactly,
the historical base of that building.
Exactly, because that goes back to like all the non-conformity-ish things as well, like, you know, if you have a footprint, then that.
Yeah.
significance-
Michelle, I'm trying to catch up here.
Because coding would make you.
Is what you're saying is because of this variance ruling that all quasi-historic buildings, even if they're on the register, not all existing buildings, are essentially exempt now because of that ruling, and so therefore we gotta work around it? I'm not
Well,
following what's
my
going on.
understanding is, I'm no attorney, but my understanding is that the way that this currently reads and then that decision, could create a precedent that any type of historic property would fall under those exemptions.
And
Which would be
so-
every lot in the entire city.
And so that exists as it is,
Mhm.
and so is she saying that all these purposes reinforce that, or they are harmful, or what is she saying?
The first two, her concern is they're too broad. She said either the decision needs to be made, are we trying to protect properties on the historic register, are we trying to protect existing buildings during a certain time period? I mean, what are we actually trying to protect? Because when you talk about historic properties, that's everything in the city of
Right.
Roslyn, since the
So
entire city is a historic district.
Is what happened, in some manner, the examiner decided that was a historic building, and then they leveraged this wording? Is that what happened?
That is what happened,
Okay,
that's correct.
okay.
The
Well, that-
other, sorry.
Well, that's why we were talking about, like, what we should be really protecting is the footprint. Because if you were to rebuild, like a pizza building, you know, things like that, that was rebuilt 20 years ago, but essentially it still keeps the same footprint and therefore of significance. So you could have a footprint of significance in the language somehow, but go ahead.
So there's another category just that people are probably aware of, is that in the surveys that were done between in the last 16 years, 55% of the structures, and that's sheds, garages, contribute to the historic integrity of the town. Now, and that's according to the Department of Archaeology and Historic Preservation. So those contributing structures could possibly get on Roslyn's register or not, but so not all the buildings are contributing. So there's like, it's kind of a subcategory to the properties on the register, the contributing structures. So that could be something this applies to. Just to throw that out as another piece.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what the metric is, but I guess the question first is, do we want to protect every single property in the city of Roslyn? It's an odd thing to have an entire city be a historic district, so that's where this language becomes a little bit problematic.
To me, 8 seems like a statement. 8 to me is, to me, like what your mission statement is of, hey, we're here to protect our community. Why is that even in a policy or a code? That shouldn't even be there, as far as I'm concerned. And then when you look at B, I think it needs to be broken down. It should say existing historic structures, and it doesn't need to say on the registry, existing historic structures, and then I would say any undeveloped lots. There's no historical relevance in the sense of on that lot unless there's something historical of a foundation that's been done, which probably eliminates them building on it anyways, or an issue. But I'm just trying to separate the lots completely from existing historical structures, and then I would take line A and just take it out. I think that's just a garbage
Yeah,
statement.
I think A is easy to take out, but you say an empty lot, let's say like hotel, the inn, now it's an empty lot. How do they conform to this? Do they have to have, now they had, I don't know how many rooms they had, let's say 8.
19.
19? So their parking would be 40,
Right.
if
I mean,
I
if you
know
count the
correctly?
rooms, some of them are like.
Yeah,
they call
yeah,
it,
but let's just say 10, so
Yeah.
we
Yeah,
need
that's
20
better.
parking spots or
Right.
whatever to our formula. That's not happening there.
No.
We're gonna overcrowd that area, so I think, I don't know,
Well,
because-
and keep in mind,
That's the second.
a lot of that stuff, I don't know,
Yeah.
you guys probably haven't read through all of it, but a lot of the stuff that Justin and those guys worked on will address some of that issue. Yes, you're correct. The way it reads right now would be very difficult to me. I don't know that will be the case when we adopt the new language.
Yeah.
Which won't be in this update probably, but will be shortly thereafter.
Be after.
So, I don't wanna elude you that it hasn't also been addressed elsewhere, it's just we might not
Oh.
get that in this update.
yeah, it just came to mind of thinking like, okay, like with Mark's example, everything gets torn down, what do we do? Some got torn down, here's a smaller scale, what do we do? How do we, but, sorry to kind of jump some more, but I'm just, thinking of every structure that's out there that, from a blank lot to now a rebuilt lot to a new lot, so.
There's also some language in here, and I can't remember exactly where, about if there's a, you know, a natural disaster, if a building is damaged by an earthquake. It doesn't say torn down, and Michelle, you probably know more where that is, but.
It's in there.
Yeah, it's in the,
someplace.
not, yeah.
So that kind of is somewhat covered, maybe not,
I think what it says is that
It's a
you
repair.
can do repairs
right.
for
It's a
safety.
reduced time period.
Yeah,
Yeah, you have
Yeah,
seven,
without-
7
yeah.
days without a
Puts a
permit,
repair.
and
but
then
you
have to
can't
pay in a
you
permit.
can't redo the brick.
That would be a
Under
big
that.
deal.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, that's,
I mean, I really like this first section, this 18.130.010, all of it. I think it's a mission statement, and I think that as a mission statement, it is extremely ambiguous. And to have it stated there, any of it can be used against anything in any way, because everything can be, you can latch onto one and use it against another.
Because it doesn't say specific, it's very broad and gives you a
Right.
lot
I
of
mean,
weight in different directions.
Increased traffic safety.
Mhm.
We can do all sorts of things that can destroy historical significance in the spirit of increasing traffic safety and everything else. So I think just eliminating all of it, we can still keep it as a guiding principle in our hearts and heads and write it on the wall if we like. But keeping it out of code, I think, protects the city.
I don't think keeping it in our hearts and heads is actually strong enough.
Okay.
I mean, I do think that we need to, you know, spell it out.
I mean, I would maybe in a mission statement on the newly formed charter of this the Historical Preservation Committee. I mean,
Well,
Which that's what it states, that's what's in the name now. But for our parking, I don't see it belonging there.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, we can promote and preserve historical properties and historical character of our community other ways. Parking is now the future. Now we have cars that are big and everybody has a car. This was written when we didn't have many cars coming into town. But we have to figure out how to,
actually, it was written about 10 years ago.
and that was a
I
duller
believe so.
time in Roslyn. We are seeing a huge bump from 10 years
Yeah, I
ago.
just watched things, so it's not ancient.
I didn't, well, 10 years ago for Roslyn's a long time ago because it's changed dramatically. So now how do we get by that but also protecting ourselves? Historical
So
preservation.
If we
Sorry.
left it in there and just changed it to read, for example, we eliminate A, and the second one would say promote the preservation and use of existing historic structures.
Right.
The only problem with that is what is historic? How are we defining historic, I guess is the only question there. Leave C, maintain a pedestrian friendly environment. Leave D, assure adequate off-street parking.
Yep.
Delete E and F.
Yep.
Leave G, promote the use of public property for public parking. Although
But that's
we
just
could
a
probably-
statement.
but I mean,
though.
what's promoting it?
probably
What
could
That's
promotes
probably
and what
just a
doesn't?
statement from
Yeah.
the city saying, hey,
So,
we're
okay,
promoting
so
public
reduce, delete, so in that case, E, F, G, and H deleted. I, reduce the visual impacts of parking lots. Delete J and K. Leave L, provide safe opportunities for unloading delivery trucks, although I don't know that needs to be in the parking either. Delete L. Promote the use of alleys, I mean, this is legit. Promote the use of alleys for parking and loading. I mean,
Yeah.
that we do.
That goes right in the loading and unloading classification.
So that's
We
true,
got a
it
lot
does.
to talk
So
about.
I guess it would just be, you could leave B, C, D, I, and then M could go or stay, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is where you just clarify historical structures, whether existing or however you want to do it, and this is where you also identify undeveloped lots and what those follow underneath, and then you just move on into the code.
I like Michelle's idea.
I just want to say, if there's nothing wrong with these things as in terms of the philosophy of the city and the mission statement, but in terms of it for parking, for me, I would be looking to the attorney to tell us
What
how
we
we
can
can
say, yeah.
position our code to enforce and implement our parking standards. And if any of these things are at odds with that, and I can see where they would be, because a lot of them are ambiguous and fight against each other, are subjective. I mean, if she advises to keep 4 of them and remove the rest, or remove them all, I mean, I think we should look at that pretty closely. Because the whole point is to enforce our parking code.
And this sets a stage. I think, I appreciate the lawyers.
But she's saying it's not.
I-
She's saying it's
I-
being used against us.
I think it's being used for us because it saved a structure. I mean, it helped with the structure. So you and I, we can see it differently, but
But how do we save a structure? Sorry, we've kept saying this, and how is this affecting a structure?
you'd have to go through the whole thing. It impacted,
Well, we have
it
time.
impacted the use, it impacted the use of that structure. If the parking issue wasn't kind of solved, they couldn't use it as a boarding house.
But they have other options.
But say there,
They had other options
That's
out
right,
there
that's
that
right.
they were seeking, and sorry, that's a personal thing that I was dealt with them, but there was other options out there.
There's multiple options.
There
He
was
could lease
multiple,
land, he could
right.
lease lots, he's
Yeah.
had opportunities to lease properties, so there was outs for him. No matter who bought that, they could have done those
He actually
options.
attempted that. But I don't want to argue
Well,
about that.
that's not true.
Well,
I
I
think we
attempted
better be
it,
very
and it was
careful.
solved. It
I am-
was solved in a way.
Yes, let's be
So
very
But he
careful
went a
about
different
this.
route, and he got what he wanted,
My
which is fine.
opinion can be respected as much as anyone else's. I don't need to be argued with about this.
I'm not.
And I think we're
Sorry
kind
if
of
you
going
felt
off.
like I'm
So-
arguing.
I really don't appreciate that.
Just
So,
so I,
and
just so
really-
I- just so I understand, so what you're, because I don't really know 100% of what happened, so what you're saying is, had he not had this language to allow him to get a variance, then he wouldn't have maintained the historic nature of the building?
It allowed it to be used as a boarding
Oh.
house, which is a historic feature.
Okay, so, okay.
The lawyer cited that language, the hearing examiner cited
Couldn't-
that language.
So the ambiguous language that we had actually worked towards preserving the building?
Exactly, that's the point actually, you said that better than I did, that's what I'm trying to say. But I do agree with Michelle's fine tuning, I like the way you're cutting that up, and I
Well,
was,
and what the attorney had said is this should define what you're trying to do. I think we are trying to maintain a pedestrian
yeah.
safe. We are trying to
Always.
protect historic structures to some degree. I mean, we are trying to reduce the visual impacts of parking lots, and that's how this code is written. But rather than, I mean, a lot of these are such broad statements, then they get. But I will send it to her and have. I mean, she kind of discussed it with me, but I didn't actually nail her down and say which one should.
We should just get to a consensus of what
So,
those
I
issues
guess
are,
my
whether it's
question is-
land, existing, and have her work on writing those 3 or 4 different ones up as separate issues so we can
My question
itemize
is-
those as separate ways to develop.
My question is this, for a bigger picture though. So, for this parking and loading, what actually do we want to achieve? Do we want new businesses, whether it's an existing building or not, to provide off-street parking? Or are we saying we're going to accommodate that and absorb it into the existing parking because protecting the historic structure is more important than providing parking? I guess that's the question, and I don't have an opinion one way or the other. I'm just asking so that we are making sure we're achieving the goal.
Well, in my mind, this goes back into this big, broad parking conversation of if you look at the statement on here about, city basically looking at lots to make parking lots, this goes right into that of saying, honestly, it starts with the administration in the city of where's those lots gonna be, designate those lots, and then we can actually start steering this into these existing structures that
Well-
want to do, say one wants to be a bar, you need to provide 12 cars, and they can't. So what they do is we go and you look at some of these examples, which are fantastic. Thank you, Justin, by the way. But this is exactly the line of why we need to provide a structure that we could identify existing structures that would pay to that parking lot to help maintain, develop, whatever it takes. Because we all know there's no parking on Penn Street to do it. So we need, as a city responsibility, I think we need to provide the space as a city to make this code even work of existing structures.
You
Sure.
know, about the problem, sorry.
Multiple other historic towns that have this exact same issue, because cars didn't exist when the towns were plotted. And Telluride's one, and Park City's another one, and they're way bigger than we are, but they have remote lots that all of the businesses pay into to get the vehicles off the street. And the businesses pay into a shuttle, you park there, hop on a free shuttle, businesses are subsidizing, it's free to the riders, but it gets you right into town. No parking hassle, nothing. And we don't have to look at all the cars.
That makes a lot of sense to me, because at the 30,000 foot level, the very essence of the historic character of Roslyn was before car.
Right.
It's gonna be virtually impossible to impose any kind of car or parking restriction and keep that historic character. They're always gonna be at odds, let's put it that way.
This is the deal.
And so that seems to make a lot of sense to me.
It seems like the big way out, how we get there is a different question.
And that's why I say it needs to start here. We need to identify those lots for me to close the whole commercial parking zone up. Because we can't go into some of the ideas that have been put out there without identifying those so we could actually direct funding and direct costs to that area. And depending on where these new buildings are existing, we have to identify it. And I think it still has to start there before we even finish the parking conversation. I think we have to identify those lots and be willing to develop them as
Well,
as soon as
that's
possible.
all I'm trying to get a feel for, is that if that's what we're gonna do, then we all have that mindset moving
I
forward.
believe the
But I
council
don't
with
wanna
the
come
comments
out
are-
of this,
Yeah.
change all these purposes around, and then everybody says, oh no, we're not gonna make
Because I just see battles with
parking.
existing structures and parking and saying, well, now you changed your use, so now you have to have 8 spots. Well, you're not gonna get 8 spots. And then we waste time and forth going back and forth. We provide as a city some lots and areas for these people to contribute to. It takes them to say, you could take lot A, you could take lot B, and you contribute to one of these others, whether it's an annual fee, a monthly fee, a one-time builder fee. But I think it starts with the city, and we have to provide the source for that to be used through the parking code.
I think we might be moving away from our purpose here. I mean, I know Michelle needs her question answered, and I'm sorry, Jeff, but.
Yeah, no. But
But
I,
if we want to kind of get this document finished, we have to get this document finished.
Well, I think Michelle got the answers.
No, I got, that answers it.
And then
That-
I
that
agree
answers it.
with, I agree
Yeah.
with B, with the change in the language, C keep, D keep, I keep, M keep.
And M key.
Okay.
And then
Yeah.
just, and give those to legal
Yep.
and see what she,
Well, this whole thing still needs to go to her after we
Okay,
finalize
that
it.
sounds good.
Yep.
Michelle, was there anything else the attorney wanted us to address in the parking?
And we're agreeing that other than that change that we just discussed in the eliminating, based on legals, that we're leaving it the same until we, okay.
Agreed? So,
yeah, I think so. For the purpose section.
I think that still achieves our goal though.
Michelle, this under the general parking grid doesn't list the ADUs. We had talked about that.
I think I still have that in my note. You're talking about that table?
Yeah, 18130, and a minimum parking
it's
requirement.
3-0.
18130,
Let me make sure, but I think I have
page
it.
54.
54, yeah.
I'm on 54, yeah.
Yep, I've got it.
What we were talking about is if your ADU is in the home, no additional parking space is necessary. If it's a separate ADU, there should be at least one additional.
I agree with that.
is that makes sense?
Yeah,
What's the difference between, why would it be different between being in the home or being separate?
To encourage, it's kind of a way to encourage additional housing units or rental units inside the house, so. And if it's a separate little building, you should have your own parking for that one.
Because, I mean, at one point they had written, I think OTEC had written in here, a suggestion that we eliminate the parking requirement for detached ADUs if they're, you know, as a way to encourage affordable housing. So in other words, we would eliminate the ADU parking requirement for long-term rentals, but then keep it for short-term rentals. So I don't really see why, yeah, I mean.
I think a lot of us were against it. Like when we talked to the committee, because of a basic house has got 2 parking structures, typically 2 cars, and we have 50-foot lots generally throughout the entire city. So that if you take that separate structure behind the lot and say, oh, you don't need parking, where does that 3rd car park?
It can't be in front of the neighbor's house, it have to be
in front of-
within the lot lines.
Yeah, and there's, you know, we have a habitual parking code rule in our policy that if you were my neighbor and you had an ADU and you parked in front of my house on a regular basis, I would enforce the habitual parking code on you and I would have your car towed or have it moved because I mean, we have 50-foot lots. You basically get 2 cars per lot. If you start letting people have ADUs and they don't need parking, you're taking all the street parking away from your neighbors that have viable houses that aren't renting their lots. And I don't think that's fair at all.
See, and I see where you're at, but where we live at, we don't have alleys that are maintained, so we put an ADU in the backyard, there's no parking, and we're still parking on the street, we have no off-street parking whatsoever. So, it kinda, I see both sides, but
But what we were kind of thinking is not every lot here is gonna be eligible for an ADU
For sure.
regardless.
Yeah.
And the parking may be that filter.
Yep.
Yeah.
Again, it's still not fair to the neighbors.
oh yeah,
If
for
you're
sure.
surrounded by 2 houses that have ADUs and you don't,
Yep,
and they don't have to have on-site parking, they're just gonna overflow into the neighborhood if the real residents already have their couple vehicles.
Yeah.
And, I mean, if we were to enforce the not parking in front of the neighbors regularly clause, they'd have no place to park.
Yeah.
No, yeah.
And so
it's
we're
like-
kinda killing ourselves right there.
Yeah.
It always like yours, you know, there's a future, there's a way we can plow that alley, but there's also
Yeah.
what we found in this town, and I'll say that there's people that have garages that, I mean, there's 2 garages I've done this year that Roslyn does not maintain, but they are owner maintained. They plow them themselves, and they figure it out, and they work with our public works and say, hey, where could I put my snow if I wanted to plow this unplowable alley? And they work it out, and they come up with the solution. I think that's what's gonna happen as
That's
people
what's gonna
move
have to
and move
happen.
through.
I
Yeah.
think we have the conundrum with what we have existing, but we're looking at Forterra as well. They really should take that into account.
They should meet every one of our requirements.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
They should.
Yeah, so I really think there should be the additional ADU parking.
We thought it was a happy medium, is what we thought, of not encouraging or discouraging the ADUs. You know, maybe you're renting the basement out of your house that had been something else, well, that's fine, you don't need to provide an additional parking stall. The structure is already there, it works. But you're doing that one in the backyard, I mean, it's, you know, they could still apply for a variance
Yeah.
in front of us. They have the parking, they have a lot and a half or 2 lots that they wanna do it on. And, you know, they didn't have the chance to look at that variance, but I think if we can be too restrictive and accommodate a variance, but if we're open-ended, we can't come back and rein it in.
And with Forterra, like essentially you're encouraging the development of alleys as Roslyn's true character, you know, persists. So you essentially are, you know, enforcing the development of alleys and that development to be used.
With ADUs.
With ADUs, exactly.
Yeah, with
Which we
newly
expect
developed
that-
ADUs,
with the newest
guaranteed.
yeah, exactly. And then they'll have everything plotted correctly.
And then there's just an example of that, basically, of what we want to see.
Exactly.
Yeah, I'm fine with that.
This
that
is a
happening.
compromise then.
That's what we
Yeah,
think it
yeah,
is. We
yeah.
think it's
I see that.
a reasonable compromise.
Yeah,
That
no, I
was
get
it.
that.
And the compromise is
Yeah.
1 spot versus 2, because remember before there was
Right.
like 2, if you had like a 2-bedroom, it's 2 spots. Now this is just ADU, you know, 1 spot per ADU.
So,
Yeah.
that's what we came up with.
Yeah,
And so that allows for that, you know, affordability, like, you know, you don't necessarily need 2 spots and you lose real estate period.
And you'll find ADUs are probably a lot of single people and,
Yep, exactly. They usually have 1 car anyways.
yep, exactly. And we're such a walkable town, I think it's just a good formula.
yeah.
And good neighbors, to be honest with you, is how I look at it. Because I think as ADUs go, and if they, like, maybe you don't have parking, you're still, what I see is that you're gonna need to go to your neighbors and get permission somehow to have that extra car parked somewhere else, unless you're gonna provide it yourself.
Yeah,
Yeah.
well, it all depends on where you live too. I
Right.
mean, like
Yeah.
Upper Brookside, nobody lives up there.
Yeah,
You know,
no.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I don't see that parking
We
problem the
do.
way that, yeah.
So a few of us do.
Yeah, all right, we all live in.
Just everybody here.
No, I don't live on, well, no, I don't.
Kinda.
Actually, I do, I do have something on Brookside to say, I live there if I want.
I just want to be sure that we haven't all left.
Yeah, right. Well, no, D Street up behind me, there's, you know, like 1 permanent resident, no,
Yeah.
there's 2 permanent residents up there,
Uh-huh.
yeah.
But different parts of town are different.
Yeah.
And we
Yeah.
want something
I
that
think it's a
good happy
applies to
medium.
everything.
Yeah, I do too.
And it's up for discussion, I mean. as
And I
we
do
go
think as your
forward.
neighbors and situations, you'll be able to work through things as they come about, right? You'll have, hey, you know what, can I do this? And you find, yep, that neighbor says, you know what, we could live with that, I only have 1 car, and you make it work.
Yeah.
Michelle, is there something else you're trying
Make them take the shuttle.
Would that be 911 shuttle?
What was that, Mike?
That would cost money.
It's not Uber, that's Uber amounts of money.
Was there something else the attorney wanted us to specifically focus on?
No, the purpose statements were the big one. I mean, I'm sure there'll be other things when we actually do the full update there, but I just those, I wanted to try to get those little ones in there at least.
Do we all feel comfortable we've
No, but that's why I'm like.
dealt with
right
the
back
small
right now,
slice of parking?
Stack it, correct.
Good. I think as Mark Twain said, first thing you do is eat a frog because everything else tastes like, you know, honey. You got the parking frog thing.
Oh, unless you fry the frog, that's pretty good. Legs.
I will do the next big one, just so we can get it off.
Get it over.
Well, first of all, we're going to add, I talked to Sarah yesterday, and we're going to add commercial overlay to the table, which is what we had talked about. But urban forest overlay. We talked at CAC a little bit about that. As I thought, it's a much bigger discussion, and there's numerous feelings. I think it needs to be as much of a priority as the parking and the loading, but I don't think we're gonna get it in this update. So my recommendation is just leave that the way it is for right now, with the intent. I'd like to set some deadlines of when we're gonna finish these by. It would be good for me, but that's another one. We need to do that soon. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I think that's what we need to do. We need to identify groups, I think, of council for us to jump in and help facilitate getting these done if we do this that way. These three big, don't you think?
I think so too. I mean, I think that makes sense.
Have involved committees of meeting and getting through these. So, and there's a lot of research to be done, especially in parking and so forth.
And there's some background on things like that that would be used that some of us either know or have access to that might be useful as people make decisions. I mean, sometimes these things happened many years ago.
Trying to find some of the history on the overlay and the rough has been difficult because there's only been a few different input, it sounds like, of why, not really a direct answer of why it was done.
I think it's clear why it was done, but it was just, the question is, you know, it seems really spotty.
It is.
Yeah, I mean, why was it applied here and not there? You know, that sort of question.
Yeah, but then there's, you know, there's some personal property right, I think, when you put in
Well,
some of the.
zoning's a thing.
Oh,
I mean, a personal property right,
Yep.
yes, but I mean,
But
zoning
then,
has
right, but then I think we
existed.
need to look at the zoning because it affects people's property rights, and I think we need to, it does that. It's a big topic, because as I looked at it, I have a different opinion about it maybe than some, but I know that I've shared the same as some of the CAC members, that they felt it was a little bit of a, worried about development and subdivisions in these lots, and I guess I'm not that concerned about it in today's, considering we are an urban growth area and we're supposed to have high density, so it's actually counterproductive to what we're supposed to do as in our area.
But if we're gonna talk about it now, we should decide to all talk about it now or table it.
Yep, let's table it.
Well, like I said, we have time. This is the time to talk and not maybe make decisions, but just to hear each other out on some of these topics, just so we can go home, digest them. And then later on, when we go into our small groups, or we just do it as a council, as an agenda item, we talk about it and we bring back the points that we bring tonight.
So we're talking about just expressing our opinions right now.
Yeah, just
so-
a little bit of what we
exactly.
see
Kind of
out
like
of
with
the
the
code.
parking, we just kind of went over it a little. Like, I have a different opinion about it. I think, yes, they wanted to save a buffer, but we also wanted to do influx of growth without growth in the expanding our growth footprint. So now it's like, well, we kind of exceeded our growth. Now, there's not many lots left, so why can't we give the opportunity to homeowners that have possible ways of breaking up their property on that's buffering the Roslyn forest? Why can't we lift that and give that opportunity to influx still the growth in town without growing our footprint? Like, what is this overlay protecting? It's really just a burden to people that own this property.
It brings more tax revenue if we eliminate it also out of their private properties.
Yeah,
When it goes to personal private property with the tax.
And it
rate will
could
be
possibly be developed into another house that brings more money to this town, except for just being I think, a burden to residents that own in the overlay.
There is a reduced tax designation for all the properties that are covered by the overlay.
That's good to know.
For the open space.
Yeah. So you all know I'm conflicted here with these because I have a property that's covered by the overlay. So I actually would prefer that it be looked at separately because I'm going to have to recuse myself, right, from voting on this.
Yeah.
And so if it's separate, then I can continue to review all the other things. But having said that, and since I'm going to recuse myself anyway, I'll provide, I've done a lot of thinking about this, so I'll give you my 2 cents.
We're just expressing opinion,
Yeah.
we're not gonna vote right now, so.
So, we're under GMA. Under the GMA, cities are required to be urban, right? And then the target is minimum of 4 units per acre. I've never personally seen a zoning of 20 units per acre in an urban area. That's usually reserved for the rural area. And so that's kind of odd. I'm not even sure it could hold up. Cities are given a wide latitude to provide, to protect resources under GMA. You know, you got wetlands, you got steep slopes, you got floodplains, you know, a number of things. But all of those particular resources are defined. You can go to code and know exactly what a wetland is, what its classification, its buffer. You can go and see what slopes, 30, 40, 50%, floodplains, et cetera, et cetera. In this case, a way to look at it is the city, when they adopted this so many years ago, they were acting to protect a resource in some way. But that resource is not defined. And I've talked to a couple of folks from in the past, and they can't tell you, that should know, that were part of it, they can't tell you why it was imposed, why certain lots got it, why other lots didn't. And so, just in the abstract, you know, not my self-interest, if the city's gonna protect a resource, you need to define what that resource is, right? And find, and say, this is why we're doing this, and this is what we're doing, you know, because the default position for any city is to be urban, right? That's the way cities are.
It sounds like a separate position or administrator that handles that overlay, that's trained as maybe a landscape architect or something that can kind of look at all those specific
What's the purpose?
So,
What's the purpose of it?
I was involved in that. We redid the codes in 2008, and I was on the planning commission. It took a long time. That was already discussed prior to our rezoning, so actually the idea came from previous people who weren't on the commission at that time, and nobody in this room was on the commission but me. So this is just what I know is, the overlay was put on the private properties in the urban forest, and that's why it was specifically on that. And it was to protect the historic footprint, because by definition, Roslyn has historic footprint. It's the same footprint we had in 1978. And so that was the goal behind it. And you see, Michelle? And
Yeah, I was just.
So are you saying all those properties that are subject to the overlay were at one time in the urban forest?
they are, yes, they've always been in the urban forest.
Well, how do you define?
Wouldn't have Brookside all been in the Roslyn Urban Forest way back in the day? There's a picture of it where it's.
I'm just talking.
There's no trees back in the
I know.
Sandstone and
Almost 5,000 people here.
I'm talking
There's
about
actually way less
2008 and
trees
just before that. I'm not talking
historically.
100 years
So
ago.
did the city then sell some properties back to private?
I do not know that.
Well, I mean, how were they in the urban forest if they were private properties?
I'm just telling you, that's where the overlay, I don't.
So you're saying all of, here's a prime example of what I really don't understand. So this is, if you go out, this is along 903.
Yeah,
It's just right off 903.
Right.
that's a
There's
farm.
no trees on that lot, except in the very back of it.
It's pasture.
Good
It's
question.
the
Yeah, it's a
pasture.
pasture.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's where I personally anyway, am just confused if it was just that these are the largest lots within the city limits and we wanna keep those large. And maybe that was the goal and that's fine. But I don't know, it seems like if we were really creating a buffer, we would have gone
Fit the
all
whole
along
thing.
this edge.
The perimeter.
Yeah.
So it was.
And like this, where's Tom's? Is this,
Yeah,
Where are you
oh, it's
taking
right
this?
there,
Yeah.
yeah.
Somewhat up there, yeah.
okay, so where's those 3 lots on C Street that just,
To the left right there.
Yeah, they're right up there.
Yeah.
right in here
Yeah,
somewhere?
right there.
Yeah, so this was all one parcel and that was able to be subdivided and it's right there.
Yeah, subdivided into 3 or 4 lots,
And that should have been part of the
just
overlay.
5 years ago.
If-
Well, I think
I'm
it
just
should-
saying,
I mean,
if
yeah.
Yeah.
we're gonna make it legit and fair to everybody, that would have been part of it.
Well, it just goes back to what resource was the city trying to
Yeah.
It
protect?
was to protect basically the historic footprint that was in place from in 1978. And I'm a little fuzzy, it's been a few years, but I just wanted to I want people to
So
know
you're
that I do.
Well, I think,
You're saying, Janine, that all of these lots were already.
My neighbors put in a big 15-foot hedge, and I'm fine with it because it's their property, and they want their privacy, and I'm fine with it. It's prettier than a fence, in my opinion. I don't have a problem with hedges. I have a problem with the next door neighbor hedge because it is an obstruction to the view. That's the only hedge I have a problem with in town. So sorry to point that one out. But I see restricting hedges to 6 feet as we're putting ourselves in just another code that we can't enforce. Again, if we want to do the 6-foot hedge, are we doing it to the highest point because and sorry to use the gentleman's example, but it tiers up. So are you using 6 foot from this one or this one, from the lowest one? How are we doing this? So,
So right now, the code is, there is no restriction on the side. Is that?
Or the rear, for
Right now.
hedges.
For
Yeah.
hedges right now, so we're
We
talking
just
about-
matched the fences is what they did, is what they did.
is what we're meant, yeah, for
Or
around
should
the,
we add it to the code?
we're adding
The
it to
only
the code.
restriction right now for
Nope.
hedges is 4 feet or less in the front yard.
The front
I think
yard.
we leave it to fences and that's it, and we leave bushes out of it.
I
in
do
my
too.
opinion.
I think we should put something about maintaining and the firewising and making sure that it's, they're well kept, not dead or so, and you don't keep it like, but hedges are just, I think, yeah.
But
And we
I-
do have code for policy of basically hedges encroaching into sidewalks and right-of-ways, and which aren't enforced, which need to be enforced, right? I mean, we know
Yeah.
that there's several sidewalks you
I'm
have to
guilty.
get off of.
Yeah.
It happens everywhere, right? We
Yeah.
know that. So, I mean, we can't enforce an existing code that we already have. Why add another? I mean, there was a letter given to us by a part-time employee here a while ago, how, cutting some of the fat on some of these things we just don't enforce and can't enforce in our codes, and I think that's one of them.
Yeah.
Just a note on the arborvitae, arborvitae is actually called out as one of the trees that people should not be able to plant once we change our code, because they're a fire hazard. They go up just like a
Spark.
spark. And just, it's one of the few that's actually called out.
Oh, okay.
So it might not be an issue once we adopt that fire
Yeah.
management code.
Yeah.
So,
Well, it would be an issue only, I mean, that would only apply to stuff
new stuff.
Yep.
Yeah,
now.
right.
Yeah, because we've
That
got,
doesn't apply to existing.
I've got a 20-foot arborvitae next to my house, which I'm just trying to talk to my neighbor about, could you just, part of it fell over, I said, could you just cut it down, replace it?
Yeah, maintain it.
Maintain it.
I just don't see, I don't see the importance of ramming this one through for to stop one project or change that. I think it just stays away.
I think some of the hedges are unintentional to start with. They're stuff that got planted, and over time, it's all grown. I mean, there are intentional hedges, but there's a lot of them around town that are just, they were somebody's yard, and selectively eating their way through it, it's become a hedge or a border. And, some of it's made up of trees that are 30 feet tall mixed with this and this and this, and, I mean, it doesn't make any sense to try and bring that down.
I actually would support bringing it down, just if we were gonna vote on it, I just wanna say, I could hear people's arguments, but I also kind of think they can.
Again, I think it's property, I think it's the owner, it's what they wanna do on their property, and if it's a bother to the neighbor, hopefully the neighbor can come over and talk to the neighbor and figure something out. I don't wanna be the one to tell you, you can't put a hedge this tall because I don't want you looking in my backyard anymore. Like, I wanna give people the option to have a privacy without doing a fence, but with doing something maybe natural.
And, we have lilacs through the tree, we've got plum trees that define property lines, and then so we're gonna say hedge versus a tree, what, you're gonna cut all your lilacs to 6 feet because I have 12-foot lilacs that are basically one side of my yard.
All of them are 3.
I mean, I just can't see that, I think.
Create a lot of bickering.
Yes.
Yeah.
Over something that's probably people really enjoy.
Yeah.
Was this something that we wanna vote
And
on
it takes one
at
bad
this
apple
point?
sometimes over something, right,
Or is it more?
I mean, and what you're talking about would just be leaving the code as it is
Leave it as it
versus-
is.
I would leave it as it is.
Leave
The
it as it
front, I understand, like totally understand, but the sides and your privacy of your own backyard is, if it stays in your property, it should be like,
I'd like to call for the question. In other words, vote on it.
yeah.
I'll just add in my 2 cents is, so, as some of you know, I just have this row of plum trees that have been volunteers and our neighbors, and they're probably 25 feet high,
That's
right?
like,
I have the same thing.
I don't know if this would apply to them or not. I think the city should think, in just my opinion, I think the city should really focus on things that are hazards, right? Things that are the public safety and welfare. There's a fine line between a homeowners association and a city. And we need to think about whether we want to step too far over that line, because then it becomes, really difficult. The enforcement is difficult, but public safety is a whole different deal.
As
So,
the chair of the Historic and Planning Commission, I propose we remove hedges from this section, just leave it as fences, leave it as is.
So you're talking about removing hedges altogether, no restriction at all?
That's
Except for the front.
Except for the front.
Except for
Yeah.
the front.
Oh, so leave it as it is then?
Right,
Leave it as is.
leave it as is.
So we can get a motion for that if you want to vote on it.
Yeah, I'll make a motion that we leave the hedge policy as is existing and not add to that code reference.
With the exception of corner lots.
With the exception of
Yeah,
corner
which
lots
reads
being
now.
two front lots, yes, with the setback on the corners appropriate.
so if we can have a little discussion now.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think once we look at, and I'm not an expert on this, the city's prohibited flammable plant list, we'll take care of some of this stuff.
Mhm.
I mean, once we accept something that involves what you can do within 5 feet, what you can do with 30 feet, it will take care of some of the issues that people were concerned about. That's my discussion.
No plums on it.
Not right now.
That's historic, they're good plums.
Lilacs are though.
We got a lot of angry Croatians.
They would roll over in their grave.
Okay, council, all in favor of leaving the hedge discussion or vernacular as is and only changing the fence, say aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed, say nay.
I'm gonna say nay, but
Okay.
I know I'm gonna lose, and that's
Did you
fine.
catch that, Brenda?
Nay.
Jeff Shear?
Jeff?
He seconded,
Okay.
but I
Tried
sorry,
to.
I guess.
Did he second? So did.
All right, so it looks like leaving
good.
as is passed 6 or 5 to 1, I guess. Derek, next, Michelle.
Can we bring up trees?
Significant trees, are we still on
Well,
board with
we're tabling
eliminating
that
that and
till
having
next-
them
Yeah,
vote
I've
on
got
it?
postpone, I've got
I-
significant
I-
trees.
Do you guys wanna
I've got
vote on that one too,
parking.
or?
I would like to.
He's got a good comment though.
I would just like to say we could just leave it as the city. Again, it's just property rights and people own their property and should be able to do what they want with their property. And I don't think the city should be able to dictate that. But I think this is important for the city's trees and the city's properties to keep this in there for that language. But not for people that own their property.
Not private property.
Oh, that's good.
But I think that like the number one tree that pops into our head is the tree that we light up every year. We want to keep that tree no matter what. Like that's a significant tree to the city of Roslyn.
And ones in
Trees like
parks
this
we
that we can
see.
identify.
Yep.
Trees in the park. The tree,
Yep.
I think that tree is gone now. It's in the park.
It's gone now.
But like trees like that is what we should consider
trying
as
to
the city of
protect.
Roslyn a significant tree. Not the tree that's in your yard or my yard or your yard that you want out. Because if you want it out, you're unfortunately gonna go through a process and you'll just kill the tree and then go through the process of eliminating it then. You'll get rid of the tree no matter what if you wanna get rid of this tree.
So I got a little background, I'm not
Yeah.
supporting or denying, but because I thought, there's somebody who wrote that code before my involvement in the city, and I've been here 15 years. I thought somebody did that, and I finally found out, even before CAC was formed, it was written by council and 2 or 3 citizens. And it was started because there was some spate of people, and I don't know who, cutting down either single or small stands of significant trees in town. It was kind of a thing, and so it was happening often. And so that code was written and approved by council probably more than 20 years ago. So it's not like it kind of came out of nowhere. I thought, to me, that was like, okay, that makes sense.
And that's about the timing actually in building, I'd say in building regulations that tree protection and removable of significant trees came into a plant ratio. In all building, I mean, we've dealt with this on the west side where we built for years into other neighborhoods. Once you took out a substantial tree, there was a ratio they'd like to see a plant. And this started about 20 years ago, so that all sort of fits the realm of that. But I think, because we found that people weren't just, I don't think people that move to Roslyn come here to lop trees. I think it's very few. I think people enjoy our atmosphere and they like it and that's part of it. And there's going to be an occasional tree we might all be disappointed in. But that's where I think we got into the public conversation. Noel and I just had a brief conversation on how we looked at, the public, our city structures should really be protecting those, but private residents, I think, should be independent.
Yeah, because we'd have the cemetery, there's all sorts of areas that we don't think about, all these trees that we probably want to keep as a city. That's what we should be focusing
So
on,
what
as
I-
a city.
What I'm hearing from council is we're still tabling the significant trees, but we
Yeah.
focus on public trees
Yeah,
and not private trees.
and that would be my suggestion.
That was, I second the suggestion.
When I did a bunch of background research, when we decided to table this after the last meeting, kind of small town tree preservation things, it almost all, 90% of it were focused only on the trees in the public right of way.
Okay.
For the exact same reason, they're overstepping private property boundaries.
Yeah.
And either the tree was coming down no matter what, or it was this contentious lawsuit back and forth over these trees.
Yeah.
And neither one of those is a great thing, so.
When we do this again with you guys later, keep in mind, I think part of what was brought up 20 years ago or whatever on 4th Street overlooking the park, I think there was a couple people that were cutting trees down.
Oh, because they
To
wanted that
open
view of
their
the
view
park.
of-
Yeah.
And I think that's where we look
So
at the
great
coal mine
point,
trail.
Yeah, so we gotta just keep that in our mind.
No, and I think these are
You could
great
buy a
hills,
new
why we have
house,
commit.
level,
Yeah.
2 lots of
Are there-
trees.
Are there issues with removing trees on hills like that?
Well,
on
see, that
slopes?
might be a safety issue.
Yeah.
Well, runoff issues, drainage issues, that
Yeah.
comes into all the creek that runs along the coal mine trail, there's
It's a-
yes,
it's a
there is an
big
impact.
You
Right,
could
yeah,
request that the
that
property
makes
owner have
sense.
an environmental
If
impact
I'm
statement.
trying to put pieces
Yeah,
Good
20
idea.
years ago, you didn't have to do all the environmental stuff that you have to do
Yeah.
now either.
Right,
so-
well, I mean, it's like, but then also you look at, I would assume the coal mine trail has a buffer of the
150
cottonwoods
foot.
and stuff that run next to it.
Probably, yeah.
And so that'd be something to look at as we look at the substantial trees on public land, and where does that identify, especially through that ratio, right?
Right.
But then again, you know, if that person on 4th Street wants to sit and look at the park the whole time, which I wouldn't if I had all the summer events that we put on, like,
Yeah.
it seems like, why would you do that? You
Or
might just walk down-
destabilize the whole hill.
Right, I mean,
There was some-
things
Yeah.
are different than they were 20 years ago, because
Yeah.
now we have events every weekend in the summer, and I see very few that would wanna do that, but that's how we wanna look at it, is
We should look at how that's protected though, just in
Yep.
case.
I like that,
Yeah, I
yep.
agree.
Because that, if there's an environmental impact statement associated with that, then that kind of like answers that. You kind
Yeah.
of refer it to.
It can protect
by
As
itself
well
by
as
code.
steep slope and all those kind of.
Yeah.
That's a good
Are we
point.
still agreed to
Table.
table,
Yeah.
Yeah.
delete it for now, and then planning and historical
Yep.
preservation will look at something
Yeah.
that's more contemporary.
Yeah.
We'll put it on our to-dos.
It's awesome. We'll be the ones that, one of the cities that has the most up-to-date significant tree code.
Go for it.
Today's
Yeah.
policies.
I think we found our trees are.
I have a quick one, I think it's a quick
It's a
one
tree
anyway.
Good luck.
Watershed protection plan and coal miners trail plan.
Yeah.
I can't find them. Do they exist?
I don't think so.
I was gonna ask
They're
Nolan, because you're on
referenced
the
in our
committee.
code, but I cannot find a copy of either one of those
The
items.
watershed protection plan was formed sometime during the beginning of the conflict between Trent West and Ridge. That's when that was, that group first came together. I wasn't there, but my relatives were. So that first came, it was actually a watershed protection that prompted some contingent in town to try and save.
So was that watershed protection plan actually for our watershed, or was it for,
It was for what's now Suncadia property. I think. I don't know. I don't
Because
know.
wouldn't our
I don't know.
watershed be?
Wouldn't our watershed be Domrey?
Yeah.
well, it would be, but
And
that's
that's
what I'm
already
asking.
protected.
Is-
Use the word.
Is the watershed protection plan to protect all of this behind us that we now own, and we don't need that anymore because we've got other things to protect it? Is it just an obsolete
I think it might.
document that we don't
Yeah.
need anymore? Because yeah, you're right, our watershed would be Domrey.
Yeah, I mean, that would be our only watershed that's open to our water
And that's not
system.
within the city limits, so
No.
we would have no regulatory.
And it's protected by its
authority.
boundaries already.
Yeah,
So it must be from the watershed coming from the ridge or from the forest. Is that what it's probably declared on, or we don't know?
I have no idea, I've never seen it, and I can't find a copy.
Yeah, it's
Not by
listed-
that name
listed
anyway,
in
but it's
the-
referenced in the
Yeah.
code.
Listed in
So-
The coal mine trail, there should be a policy book, I think.
I would think that
It's between Clellan and Roslyn.
Cleon,
It's a
Roslyn,
committee.
and the county.
That's what I thought.
I guess what I'm getting at is, do we leave these in there? Because if the documents don't exist and somebody comes in and I have to reference these documents for some review and I don't have them.
Well, has anybody called Parks and Recreation, because it is a county, Clown and Roslyn, the coal mine trail, they may have something on their back.
Nobody
pocket.
seemed to know anything
There
references
is
the
a
coal miners
commission.
trail.
Well, I'm on the commission.
He's on the commission.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, we've never referenced, yeah. But I'll bring it up to Jay. I'll ask Mary.
Yeah.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah, that'd be
Yeah.
great.
But I just thought Parks and Rec might have it being with the county, they might file something on the coal mine trail. It's very county oriented,
I
right?
think they're the ones that help fund
I think you're right, though.
for this cross-country ski stuff.
Yeah.
So it might be worth looking to see what type of structure,
Yeah.
paper structures they've started.
But it's probably through the commission.
I
Yeah.
would think that the watershed protection plan isn't relevant anymore.
Yeah,
That's what I was thinking, but
I don't see how it is.
there was a treatment pond up there in that thing, teens and 20s, wasn't there? Up
There's a
there,
little dam
it was like
up
a
there.
cholera outbreak or something.
yeah, I would guess it's been replaced
Yeah,
by
maybe that's what it was.
FEMA guidelines and everything else. Yeah,
That's a good point, Michelle.
I think it's probably been replaced by other regulations, state
Yeah.
and federal regulations. But anyway, I guess.
Yeah, so remove it is the
Okay.
question.
I
Yeah.
think that-
And then I'll find out, like I said, by next meeting, the coal mine one.
Yeah, let's leave coal mine in for now.
Because I could see, yeah, there's stuff like upkeep and probably stuff that we wanna
Well,
keep.
and a buffer
but
like
yeah,
we were talking
the
about.
buffer, yeah.
And there's rules to it, right? Like there's what.
There
you
is,
can use on
yeah,
it,
there
what
is
you can't,
rules
so there's
already
gotta be a
to it, so
guideline.
there's gotta be guidelines.
Yep.
Some significance to that might be in relation to the master plan overlay property, which is more or less bisected by the coal miner trail. So if there's some restrictions that are carried with that plan in terms of buffer, access points, that sort of thing, that would be good to know.
Mhm. Especially for Terra coming in, yeah,
Yeah.
good point.
Those are pretty quick, Michelle. Good call.
Mhm.
For us.
That was a quick answer. Witness.
Michelle, can I ask a question about something that's kind of oddly hanging out?
Yeah,
Page 12,
Oh,
1830110 SEPA. It's all struck out and strike through, except for the letter G. It's still hanging out there.
those are cheap.
I think that's probably just a typo, because she moved all of this,
Okay.
Oh, interesting.
but I'll find out.
Nice speaking.
Good call.
Messed with my OCD.
Turn that to us.
What else you got, Michelle?
I think that was all my major questions. I think everything else we covered for the most part, unless there's, if there's something I'm not thinking. I've looked at this 1,000 times, so I'm sure I'm missing something.
Mr. Garfield, you got anything?
No.
Other than the Scribner area plan?
It was significant.
Figure that's red, that's the difference.
4 items on the to be done after.
Yes.
Yeah, I've got those there was something to do with the parking fund,
So-
I would assume the fund example, urban forest overlay, and the zoning change possibly to Washington into a commercial overlay. Or
And that was gonna be down, yeah, that was,
Yeah,
what we're gonna
commercial
do is
and
prioritize it,
overlay.
because we think, I think parking is one, and I think comp plan
Yeah,
In
so,
loading.
and loading, parking and loading,
Yeah.
and comp plan, right? Like, we need to really prioritize what we have to protect, and one is we have, future development coming, we wanna make sure those are in check as a priority, and parking, as we know that it's coming down the pipe.
so I guess of those, which is the priority?
I think, oh boy, that's a tough one, they almost need to work together. How much work is left on the comp plan at this point?
The comp plan, you mean the
Or
parking and loading?
Yeah,
I don't know, there's probably still some flushing out with council. I think Justin's covered most of it though.
I think we can.
I think there's just some long discussions to be had.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think unloading, we should probably talk about it, I just heard you right,
Yeah.
just say,
We put a lot of
two
time in
different
it.
things.
I feel like
I
those could
think-
be separated.
And I think even tonight, we should maybe even bring up unloading and just talk.
Just general conversation, because he brought up lots of great
Yeah, I
points,
think
and I went
yeah.
back and forth with him a few times, and just some great points, and he went and observed a lot of it, which I think is a realistic, perspective.
Yeah,
But I do want time to read this carefully, because I just got it.
yeah, but just to have a conversation
Yep.
and hear. and-
You've got it before, Janine, you just don't know it. I
Yeah, I-
emailed it out before.
Yeah, no, I saw it, I did see it on my tablet, but.
And it's on the website, and
lot
it's on,
harder
yeah,
on
you've
the
got
tab,
it
I
yeah,
before.
just
it's
couldn't
harder.
read it.
Yeah.
This thing and I are not friends.
That's
so-
why I bring this, because I can't read that little thing.
So,
may I-
before you guys talk about parking and loading though, is there anything else anybody else has a concern about that's in this update?
There's, yeah.
Speak now or forever hold your peace.
Okay, there's something, and I'm trying to find where I saw this, and maybe there's, to me, alleys are historic features, and it seems like someplace in here, and I can't find it, although I have a number, that they're not considered historic features, like they're crossed out. I think it's 18, I don't know what page, 18 point, oh gosh, you guys, I'm sorry. 50070, I don't know.
18, in the architectural design review standards?
I don't remember.
Does it go to a 5.50?
18.050070.
Oh, 50, okay.
That's, does that make sense?
18.050?
Does that make sense? 070?
I'm a
Well,
dialect.
no, because it starts at 1810.
No, so it's 18,
18.50?
yeah, oh, yeah, let's try that.
070?
070, and it's alleys. Sorry about that, I've done a good notes.
That's page 20 of 83.
Thank you.
I have that
Is that
right
right?
now.
That's where it starts, yeah.
Yep, that's where it
Okay,
starts.
okay, so that's what we're talking about.
Thank you very much. So where was that? I thought alleys was, the line was crossed out about alleys being, I did try and search it, but I can't search this document.
What pertaining to alleys?
I thought that they were crossed out as something that was historically significant. That, because they are historically significant. That's my concern, I guess, as long as we keep them in here as something historically significant. And I'm really sorry I'm making you guys search, because maybe we should do this later, I'll really find what I'm supposed to be trying to talk about.
What is it in relation to like where the alleys, the access and that sort of thing?
Whether or not they're historical.
Or are you talking about being evaluated in the architectural design review?
Maybe.
So that's,
I apologize.
so then if it was like
Not
architectural
really.
design review, then you're looking at the structure. That's sort of the alley, right?
Or would this be pertaining to like the platting of
Gotta be platting.
new blocks and
Gotta be
streets?
platting.
Which I don't think that's addressed anywhere in here other than referenced as part of the
I think
master use process, which is
Yeah.
in itself kind of
it's weird.
open-ended and vague and,
Which will want still
Which-
something
which-
for that.
right, which is fine. I mean, like,
Yeah.
we've changed, there hasn't been much in there other than like master use goes before council and that's,
That kind of thing. I think you should, not do this right now because I'm feeling embarrassed, and I think I could try and find out what I'm really trying to say here, but let you guys find something.
Okay.
It's too much work, and
Let's talk loading. We put a lot of time in. I think it's worth having a little bit of parking and try to get some direction on where we're gonna go. Does that make sense, Nolan? Is that what you'd
Yeah,
like to do?
yeah, I think it's one of the topics that we brought up, and I think we have time to talk, so
And they
why
put a lot of time in. I think it's the due respect of the time they put in. They should
For
get it.
sure.
And I know
Before we
everybody-
move on, were you talking about the master plan overlay? Was that something that was under discussion?
Did you find it?
Yeah.
it got brought up just.
No,
It's
you're
in
talking,
this-
I was talking about the importance of finishing, the
No,
overview
but
of that.
if that was being discussed, I was looking for something, I didn't want to miss that.
We didn't.
Okay.
Okay,
No,
you're
all right.
okay. I was just giving people a break.
But we should bring that up.
But that's part of this update,
Okay,
so
yeah.
yeah, bring that up.
Get the priority of,
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
no.
So, Jesse, you want to do an overlay of your, I mean, I did read this actually, even though I said it.
happily. So, to just sort of kick it off, the problem statement is that Pennsylvania is currently being used by just about all of the businesses for loading and unloading. And we have things in the code specifically requiring loading and unloading in the alleys. So, spot needs to be provided in the alleys for loading and unloading. And the issue is that the alleys are not universally being used because they are not maintained, they're not wide enough, they can't safely be accessed by delivery trucks, and delivery trucks cannot get around other delivery trucks if they're there, so they're effectively stuck. And we, in the built environment, and I'm thinking specifically about 2 blocks in Pennsylvania there, the only way to do that would be to widen the alleys, which of course we can't do because it's the built environment, and we can't move historic buildings. So that's the basic issue, and then by being in the middle of Pennsylvania, it is creating some issues as well as being illegal. So basically we can't force the deliveries to the alleys due to their condition, and they currently are not legal in straddling the 18-inch solid yellow line, which was recently repainted. Which is,
The day after we talked
yes,
about it.
it was. I thought it was a double yellow because it
Nope,
looked like
it's a single.
Nope,
Oh, yeah.
it's a single
We used to
island.
post the fine coming into town
Oh,
of what
yeah.
it costs to cross it. It's in the shop right now.
I went looking for that sign.
Oh, I'll get a picture for you and send it to
I
you.
would appreciate that.
Yep.
It's $1,000.
Was it really?
Because in the code it's only 70,
It used to
but
be
I'm sure it's
enforced.
updated.
When we were kids, people were enforced it.
Yeah.
If you turned on one side and crossed it, to park on the other.
It was goofy.
Yeah,
It was not,
it's a, yeah.
Kids, that was your entire house.
So that's the basic problem statement, and then it goes to how do we solve this problem? And so one piece of that is allowing. Let me.
I mean, loading times is a good idea, except I think that would be difficult. especially on like a 3-day weekend, if a beer distributor needs to come in because a business ran out.
Yeah, I mean,
Right. The cones, I think, is a great idea. In fact, I'm pretty sure they're required to do that by law.
I talked with a couple of the delivery drivers and they said it was company policy, but
Yeah, it
to your
seems
point,
like,
it's just a
yeah,
good
put
idea.
it
Good
out
idea,
there,
yeah.
And not all of them carry them.
Did you identify, I didn't get to it yet, where we talked about, where you and I had that discussion of like so much off of Pennsylvania, but like see
Yes.
the rear of your vehicle, and
Yeah.
maybe there's an indicator that's painted on that yellow line, like a black, an indicator that says, listen, your truck has to be beyond this because of coming off of 903, that puts that truck in a safe zone, and that pedestrian in a safe
So
zone.
I like that idea, and I think honestly, the main delivery people that are doing it every week
Right.
already do that.
Yep.
I mean, you'll find they pull down to Village or further.
Yeah, we're just
even
trying to
though
come
they're going to the
stand-
Brick
yeah.
or Amanda's.
Yep.
Yeah.
But, there's always gonna be, Amanda's got the fancy fish people, and there's
Yep.
people coming from out of town organic
Yeah.
food. And maybe they have no idea, they're just
Right.
like, "Er," I'm delivering to this one.
But I think to create that space was a great idea, because I think it's just, whether it's new, we educate the store owners, and this is what we want to see. Because
Yeah.
you don't want to see a semi backed in 30, come in 30 feet off of 903, and here comes this little, organic van going, hey, I'm gonna drop off your salad, I'm gonna park right there, right? And then that just really,
And that does happen.
that puts a lot of public safety
Open,
hazard.
city wide open.
Yeah.
And just being, like having some due diligence for some proactive measures that communicate our commitment to
Yep.
public safety, I
Yep.
think at surface level is just valuable.
It should be our almost #1 priority as a tourist town.
But even that like Gemini, or whatever, the fish van or whatever, we should still be encouraging to be using the alley
Yep.
when
Yeah, the smaller trucks.
when it's accessible. Even
Yeah.
US Food uses the one in the alley behind the brick, which is always impressive.
He's gotten stuck.
It is
every
He's
impressive.
gotten
time.
stuck
It's
every time he gets stuck.
It's tight.
It's tight, yeah. He'll
Well,
get stuck in
that's
the middle
what
of
the
the alley
delivery
too.
for the brick is.
Yeah.
They,
Yeah.
they put cement in the basement and everything.
I actually spoke with the US Foods delivery guy, and he does one in the alley for the alcohol, and then he goes around and does another one on Pennsylvania
Oh, the food.
for the food in the
Oh,
kitchen.
Because,
Big-
yeah.
Yes,
That makes
because
sense.
the kitchen's in the front,
Because the
at
kitchen's
the old
in the
theater
front.
entrance.
That's clever.
Which I thought that was interesting, and he said, it seems to work, but then he pointed to the spots where it didn't work
Yeah.
Yeah.
across the alley.
Yeah.
Where,
We've,
Trash
council's gotten
bin.
letters about that.
Yeah.
The
yeah, there was a
dumpster may or
recent
may
one,
not
but
be in
yeah,
a bad
Yeah, we just
spot.
received a letter
last meeting.
Yeah.
and it is very.
Well, it's funny, so the bricks, I've talked to the owners there about their,
Yeah,
and where basically Waste Management's putting it. And if you'll notice now, Base Camps is right next
Right
to
there
it too.
too. Yeah.
So it didn't used to be, but now they're, and I think it's because Waste Management's like, oh, fine, that's easier to get to if I just leave it halfway on the right.
yeah, they don't have to push it out as far, right?
Right. Yeah, so,
So,
I don't know what the solution is.
I just wanted,
Yeah.
I wondered if Alicia's still on there, as a business owner in here. Alicia, are you in there?
She's there.
Yeah.
She's there.
Hi. I just wondered, because she's a business owner downtown, and she had,
Yeah, I'm here.
sorry, are you okay?
Yeah, I still have a pretty rough throat.
Oh, you okay, sorry, I just,
But I didn't catch all of that. You broke up a little bit.
oh dear. Justin's good over the parking and unloading in the alleys and stuff, and,
Oh yeah. Yeah, I mean that was an issue because where we were space-wise, because again, like especially also if there's delivery trucks in the alleyways also during the times that say Waste Management is coming to pick up, if they see the alley blocked, they just won't pick up the trash at all that day. And then we might have issues also, especially like with the restaurants and the foods, then they have overflowing trash cans. It's rotted food, we're already having a problem with rats. And so it's just unfortunate there's not a physical way to make the alleyways wider. I've been keeping track of loading times. Most of the deliveries do come generally before 1 or 2, where they park in the middle of Pennsylvania. It would be nice to designate specific loading times for that they can come and do that, but I know depending upon the schedules of these delivery drivers, because they're, they might not be able to get to us, and I know some do come late afternoon, not most of them, but I think designating a point that they have to pull into Pennsylvania far enough so that they're not too close to the corner when they're parked in the middle of the street. But yeah, the alleyways, it's just really tricky. And again, you know, if there's any kind of blocking, Waste Management just won't pick up that day. They just keep going.
Thank you, Alicia.
Yeah.
Get better.
Yeah, I think it's a good idea though, just to have the marks on the.
Yeah, I mean, we could make it red maybe. Or something.
Yeah, just some kind of indicator, just to
Identify
help.
to the business owners that, you know, that if your truck stops too close to the crosswalk, ask them to move.
Yeah.
Yeah, just to have.
Because somebody has to be there to unpack it.
Yeah, and it's, I think it's a good precedence to set a safe and legal way for deliveries
Right.
to occur, which we don't currently have.
Right.
And I think the cones, I think mandating the cones is, I think, very important, because you have those lift gates that are just eye level with your car,
Oh, yeah.
and that's your only indication of don't hit that. If you had a cone, those cones, it would just be a good reference to say, oh yeah, there's that bar, there's this plate right there that could go through my windshield. So I think that would be a good mandatory, I don't know why it wouldn't be mandatory company policy, but.
All we need specifically for this situation is like an accident to occur without any sort of communication like that, right there close to the intersection, and the state says, well, you've got to put some sort of safety device in that intersection. And so having that liability protection with that red mark closer in mitigates that whole situation that we're having.
Yeah. The DOT would be all over it.
Did they say, besides some of the companies requiring cones, if they had to wear high visibility vests or any type of, I mean, to me, that's a big difference across this, because in the, and that's right, L&I it does require it, and that would be something we may want to just write as part of our delivery policy, is that there has to be a high vis, you know, whether it's a vest, a sweatshirt, a shirt, or something that we know identifies that person that's coming back and forth across the street, because a lot of times they're just they have blue jeans or the blue shirt, and you're coming across, and those of us that live here are going really slow typically, right? Because we know that guy's going to pop out of that van or the back. But the majority of the town isn't, you know, it's tourist anymore, right? And they're just going through.
That's a good call.
Yep. Anything like that. Any
But I
little
think
thing
we should have a
can think
safety
of, just be
standard that we
safety.
require those delivery companies to do.
Yep.
And we send them those notifications to the business owners, and these are the requirements to unload on our street that we'd like to see you do.
It protects the whole city.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And most importantly, that person too.
Yeah.
That's, yeah.
And as part of this, that final bullet will be removing the requirement for the load and unload space in new construction on currently platted. And that, I think, on currently platted areas of the city. So that would be removing that 18.130.03E to apply only to unplatted areas of the city. So in other words, when we lay out, to your point, Janine, the alleys, we can make them wider to accommodate and mandate deliveries
That's actually a good idea.
in the alley.
Yeah.
That's a good idea.
But not
have
affect
that verbiage extend to just the commercial core, some language around that, because if Forterra develops, you know, alleys that are, road width, then that's not related to the character.
Yeah, I mean, there's got to be, is there an expectation? We don't know what their expectation is. Do they expect us that we're going to be plowing all the alleys? And we're, you know, we've talked about snow removal and, you know, how snow is really tough. And, you know, we've talked about, as residents, not as council members, just realize that two of us are on a group that sits on a table with Forterra as residents of Roslyn, not as council members.
Three of us are.
Three of us.
No.
Oh, that's right. That's right. Sorry, I apologize. But we've brought these up. We actually don't know what that plan is yet, you know, and we brought up that, you know, they've talked about the, what do you call it, the wetland area, how it doesn't make sense to stack all your snow there if we're worried about chemicals that are on the road, because that's been brought up numerous times. And so they've got some issues to work just that we've thrown out as living residents here. But I think, you know, the proper size alley is the right thing, the right of way off that alley. especially if they're gonna have ADUs, which they're encouraging big time, on how that parking works and not encroaching in any of the right of way.
But where their commercial what with their commercial overlay or their zone,
Their commercial zone over
they
here.
should have, we should be recommending bigger
And
alleys.
unload.
Yeah, or a spot to unload and load.
Yeah,
You
they-
can come off or park in the alleyway, but still leave a little bit of room or so.
Yeah, because they have talked about like a 200 possible event to have an outdoor space. But you know, that's gonna provide lots of equipment, so that should all be done off-street, out of the way.
Just in, not to interrupt, but just in a way to keep the code clean, if that's the concern, something like that could be imposed as part of the overlay conditions and not necessarily be part of the code, per se.
Okay.
Okay.
It's a site-specific,
Gotcha.
that what's being approved there is a site plan, and that could be one of the
Okay, great.
elements.
That's kind of
I
information.
mean, if changing the code would apply only to that particular, that could be an option, is what I'm saying.
Do we want to keep some ammo though
Yeah.
loaded for like the Harper's buildings? If they build something,
Yep.
to be able to leverage them to provide a loading platform in the back,
On the undeveloped lot.
on the
Right,
undeveloped
no.
lot.
Yeah.
But,
But that's that's plat.
yeah, but the point is, the trucks couldn't get in there.
Yeah.
If we mandate that they
that's
provide
Yeah.
a dock that can't be used,
Yeah.
it doesn't really make sense.
It seems to me that what we're talking
Not
about
the
is
same
that
thing, but
Pennsylvania,
yeah.
because of its width, is a
Yeah.
is a loading resource.
Yeah.
And other commercial zones that don't have a front street that wide, it would be a lot more challenging, and that those are the areas to focus on, right?
So if you're on Pennsylvania, you're in for,
I mean, it seems
in effect, for parking.
to have different rules on Pennsylvania might prove difficult to enforce.
Yeah, I like that. It needs to be consistent for all businesses within the corridor.
And if you're to leverage the Harper's building and that kind of example, it wouldn't really make sense because there's other things that could complicate
Right.
that example. It doesn't
When
really
Har-
apply because it's
Back when Harper's was operating, how did they get their deliveries, in the alley or out front, or in the alley?
Well, or through the vacant lot.
Well, they used
Yeah,
to.
they pilot in the
Yeah.
alley. But they would go in the alley, because when he
Yeah.
built the pole building.
When you built the
Yep.
pole building in
Yeah.
the back door.
And then a lot of stock was always in the
warehouse.
warehouse, if you
Yeah.
think about. The
Yeah.
warehouse was the plywood and the majority of
They
it
would
all.
just use the
Yeah.
forklift back and forth.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because the semi just sat on the street.
Yeah, he
Yeah,
would
he
sit
would
on
sit
Second
outside the
Street, and he would
cafe,
unload
yeah.
and just drive in and bulk everything
Yeah,
out.
and it'd
I
be
remember
blocking
that
everything.
fall
It was
that-
horrible.
Yeah.
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 Well,
And
keep
then they
in mind,
would
we
take
got a
it.
bunch of empty
Yeah.
lots, south of the museum.
Yeah.
That fall into all these things that we're talking about.
Yep, exactly.
If they all developed all the way
Well,
down.
and one of them,
And that alley's terrible.
one of them's ours, that I'd like to see developed into a parking lot as soon as possible and identified, so we can create a parking structure that actually, I highly recommend is look at the funding
Yep.
examples. I think they're fantastic. I think that's the right idea that we should be looking at for future development like that.
They're in the park. I think those are two
Yeah.
priorities that we should
Well,
be hitting.
here.
In
Talk about this here, everything's identified,
Yeah.
but I think, let's get through this OTAC thing, and, us as a
Yeah.
council needs to get back into some committees, and we need to, look for some volunteers in these committees also, and get these things designated and put in place. Because we can't move forward with more commercial parking on any new development until anything's been structured that we could actually take parking to.
And
Right,
committees
I mean-
are, and I like committees, but I think we just have longer city council meetings and we figure stuff out
I'm
together
fine with that
too.
also.
Because I have no problem sitting here for X amount of time with the group that we have, the planning and our great staff, and figuring this all out together.
Well,
Minus all.
sometimes it doesn't take
Not
staff,
saying,
though.
yeah.
Not all the time we have to guess half staff if we're careful on the
True,
count, and
we
we
can-
can come in and do
absolutely.
our due diligence and, but this is why I said earlier, we have to, city's gotta designate these spots to make this code move forward.
Since it kind of morphed to that for a second, is I read through that parking submitted with Justin and the planning commission put together. I think that's awesome from a concept perspective. I think that's gotta be the way to go. It's the only way that we can, but my only thought was, it kind of mimics an impact fee. And so typically the way impact fees work is you have to, where you essentially require somebody to pay money into a fund. Typically what you have to do is you have to have some engineering estimate of what it is that it's gonna cost and what it is that you're gonna build. Like, so if you're in a developing area, not for Roslyn, if you need a new reservoir, or a new feeder pipeline, you do a big study, determine what the costs are, and then you go, it's gonna serve this much development, so it's gonna be $3,500 a lot. you know, and so it seems to me that we're gonna have to do something to figure out how much it's gonna cost to build these before we figure out what the fees are gonna be applied to. It sounds like everybody's on that wavelength already.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying, if we identify, and then we could use the city engineer to help develop our costs, because he's really sort of next to oversee that development, right? And then he comes back and says, okay, X lot on Pennsylvania, I see 250,000 to develop that into a gravel parking structure with proper drainage. And then there's, you know, there's gonna be some yearly maintenance, and then has snow removal, right? We're gonna have to have a plan for snow removal if that becomes a public spot, and we're taking a new development of an apartment that might, building might have 10 apartments in it, right? But we want you to pay into that. So there's gotta be a maintenance fee that we can maintain snow as they park there. So just, there's a lot of variables, I think that we need, that's a lot of putting a lot of things on
The
paper.
one thing you don't wanna do is, you know, and it's gonna be a balancing act, right? You might come up with a fee that's like, holy moly, $10,000 a parking space, right?
Yeah.
I'm just making a number up, in which case the council will go, well, we wanna encourage commercial, so we're gonna reduce that. But you need to know a roadmap of where you start.
Yeah, I like that.
Yep.
Yep.
And one of the concerns in terms of the timeline is that property there on the corner, the former Harper's.
Yeah.
Because it will.
It's the next one down the line for them.
And the design will be very closely related to what parking is required.
Sure.
And so like that's kind of, time is of the essence on that one.
Right.
Just because I think we're all kind of eager to see that change from its current state.
If there's can I get an example? Let's say they submitted for it in 2 weeks, or we get the moratorium done, and they submit right after 4th of July, and for that corner lot, and we haven't done anything with parking. Does existing parking code stay within right now?
Yeah, we would just leave this the same, so we would have that in place,
Okay.
yeah.
We
We just wouldn't have this new version in place.
I don't want to be left with nothing.
No, we weren't gonna take it out, we're just gonna leave it as is for
But
now.
that's just sort of why we talked about the, you know, as being on planning, right? We knew this new structure, and so we're like, oh, we just talked about parking. There's no way we could write this up in a week.
Right, but to that example, if they were to propose parking, we would point to our current code and require them to do 13,000 feet of parking.
Yeah.
13,600 square feet of parking
Bigger than the
on a 12,000 foot lot.
Right.
So that would effectively rip the e-brake, and that wouldn't work, because that's how it's currently written.
Yep.
Right, it's at odds with the historic character. There's a tension between those two things that can't be solved, really.
And it can't be engineered with the soil, as I understand
Right.
it, so they couldn't go underground
Right.
2 stories for park. I mean,
You've seen the building.
Wet.
we got a lot going on over there, so.
Oh, you're involved?
No, I mean, just
No,
Oh, yeah.
on that.
we know historically that you're not digging an underground parking garage from base level of our street down
Right.
and successfully do it with any, you know, financial responsibility unless you got an empty, it's just not gonna happen for a developer.
Yeah. So I think that project would
At least not in this
effectively
century.
be
Not in this century.
stalled
that's right.
until this is sorted out, or it would have to go back to some flavor of variance,
Yeah.
which I think we all
Oh, that's
are
a bad
working
word.
hard to avoid. I'm
Yeah.
sorry I said it out loud.
It's a bad word.
So can I bring up master plan overlay?
Are we, where, can we just, before you do that?
Okay.
Are we, so, where are we with the loading? Just make the changes that you're suggesting, or keep it where it is right now, or?
No, we were gonna leave it the way that it is right now, no
Okay.
changes to that section, and then with the intent that we're going to adopt this
Thank you.
by.
This was just an
Just
appetizer.
discussion.
Okay.
Yes, and incorporate
This
this
is-
into
Yes,
our parking
this is
discussion.
the direction we're going, is the language, yeah.
We just wanted to get this out so we also
Oh, yeah.
had a perspective of what we're gonna
Thank
get
you
into
very
and
much,
talk
yeah.
about it.
But we're adding the policy like the cones and the high vis.
Yep, that will be written into the policy.
Okay, just make sure.
Okay, thank you. Okay, sorry.
On the master plan overlay, I could be looking at a different version, but I looked at it, it didn't seem like there were a lot of changes, and there were a few things that I thought were important to add. And you can go back and look at the comments I submitted, but one of them would be for the application to define what kind of ownership they're proposing. You know, what's condominium, what's co-op, what's this, what's that. I think that's relevant, that there be a fiscal analysis, because some of the, you know, as we know, our fiscal condition is tight right now, and some of the ownership structures that are being tossed about would reduce in significantly less property taxes. So I'm not saying that's wrong or anything, but there should be an analysis, say, to show what kind of impact that has on the city. And I'd like to see that written in, and then another, I mean, there's a number of things here, but phasing, to see, you know, that's a big thing as far as Roslyn's concerned, and so if it's gonna be built 30 units at a time, it's gonna take 10 years, that would be something worth knowing, or if it's all gonna be built in 3 years, you know, that would be something worth knowing. Once again, I'm not trying to have a negative, it's just stuff that should be known when the council reviews the application.
She's got the project phasing in here.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then the other was typically these master plans, whether they be small or large, they usually come with their own design guidelines. Now, it could be, in this case, that that the city's design guidelines are gonna be imposed, and that's gonna be it, that's fine. But if they're suggesting changes to the design guidelines, none at all. No variances,
Not at this point in
no
time.
porches, no setbacks.
You're right.
Not at this point in time.
No setback.
This is what they're telling us, they're following our guidelines.
Okay, that's fine.
Yeah, and all we'll know is when we submit.
That's been pretty consistent message over the last couple of years.
Their last plan did not show that. They were
That's
not.
true. Yeah, well, there's
But
conceptual
that's-
things architects
I don't
have done
want-
that aren't really the plan, so sorry.
Okay.
Yeah, that's just,
That's fine, it is what it is, but to the
You're
extent
right.
that they're submitting any kind of, to the extent that they're requesting any deviations from any of the standards in the city, that should be known up front, so that it can be part of the review of the whole application. And there's a number of things in there that I think are important, but I just want to point
I
that
agree, I agree, yeah.
So she's got, on this last draft, you guys have the comments on there, but she says she didn't include the items regarding unit ownership and the fiscal analysis because those seemed out of reach. Discuss if those should be included. So, I guess that's a question to you guys, if you feel that she's saying that she feels those are out of reach. I don't know if I'm inclined to necessarily fully.
Who's she? Is that the lawyer?
OTAC.
OTAC,
Yeah,
the
the
code
consultant.
I feel strongly that that's not true.
Yeah.
That's a
Yeah,
discussion.
I think it can be I understand what she's saying, but I do think that we could word it, because if we're just asking for it as information, I don't know that I agree that it's completely out of reach to ask for that,
Yeah.
but I wanna make sure before I go to bat on that everybody else
Yeah, no,
feels the
I
same
agree,
way.
I agree.
Oh, yeah. We wanna know what we're getting into.
Absolutely.
For sure. Like, that's
It's
what
our
I think.
right, and we owe it to our residents.
Yeah, that's what Cleon's dealing with, and I think even Forterra thought about it until we voiced our opinion, and they said, oh, okay, we'll switch it kind of back the other way.
Yeah.
And now they're trying to figure out how they're gonna do it. But going up front would be, we don't wanna have to question anything.
That's a good idea.
There's gonna be trade-offs,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
But we just need to know what the trade-offs are.
Yeah,
You know, eyes wide open.
For sure.
That's the thing.
We good, folks?
Good.
so going back to that master plan, do we feel comfortable with what we have in front of us for the city of Roslyn, for the historical preservation, and just the culture of Roslyn? Do we feel ready to have with our code in place, that if a master plan came in, will we feel protected for all those things? I know it's a pretty broad question, but I just want to make sure that, because that's why we kind of did this. Yeah, it was because of parking and other issues, and because our code needed to be reworked. But I think with the master plan and the biggest change that we've seen in Roslyn in the last 20 years, minus the influx of people, are we prepared
For the development.
for the development?
I have a question for Michelle on this one, is, so, the way I read the code as it exists now is the current zoning of our master, there's only one property, I don't wanna pick on a property owner, but there's only one property that's subject to the master plan overlay. And right now, the underlying zoning for that is light industrial. Any owner could come in tomorrow and submit permits for a light industrial something on that site. The master plan overlay is the way I read it, this is where I want to ask Michelle, is a form of rezone, in a way. It's not a conferred entitlement from day one. And so, the way I read the code, the council and the city have wide discretion in terms of what they can approve and what they want to approve and what they don't want to approve, which is why I've been focused on, I could be wrong on that, I want Michelle's opinion, but which is why I've been focused on making sure we get the information
Yeah.
to make the decision, right? And so,
No, you're absolutely correct. The bigger portion that I guess I'm concerned about, which is the other part of this, is, and we've discussed it a little bit, but our development guidelines. So we've talked about that detail in our development guidelines for the, we've talked about it with the swales, that we've got a landscape strip and we've got a sidewalk and we've got, that is definitely going to apply in this case. So those are the things that, and I think you guys have all seen what they're proposing, but those, I mean, that's the second piece of this puzzle. That's still coming right behind this, is those development standards too. So I guess that's the bigger concern for me, is those actual development standards as they relate to what that's going to look like when it comes out. So, but yes, you're correct. It is a form of a rezone. It does give wide discretion, and if we don't have it in, they don't actually have to provide it, and you still have to make a decision on it. So I think Tom's right. The more that we have in here, you want as much information as you can possibly legally get to make that decision. But then comes into play, okay, now we've approved it, now here's the development guidelines that you have to follow, and this is what those streets have to look like. And so, I guess that's the other piece to the puzzle.
So we did talk about possibly revisiting the sidewalk swale thing, even though it's been around since 2008,
Yep, so we updated the language in the, so the other reason we're doing this update is because the variance language in the development standards completely contradicts the code and then references back to the code.
Right.
So that language is going to be fixed in there, but then with that we can update anything else we want to too, and that might be one of them that we want to change. So it's not part of this, it's a separate document, and we don't have to go through this lengthy process to do that. But this already references those development guidelines. So right now, if they turned in their application the day that this moratorium was up, those would be the development standards they were held to.
Okay, good to know.
Mm-hmm.
Good to know.
So I guess any more questions like what you brought up, Tom, to dissect as much information from them as possible, just to have it in front of you before the decision to make, or the decision comes to the table, is going to be what we're looking for.
I think the ownership question is interesting because I could see where some folks would think that would be overreach, but in other jurisdictions, if you're going to do a condominium, they make you say you're going to do a condominium, right? And that's the type of ownership. And so, I'm not saying necessarily rental this or that, but like the co-op concept is a fairly new concept when it comes to residential type development, and even the websites that you go to advertise that one of its benefits to the people that live there is lower property taxes. And so, that impacts our fiscal situation. So I think we should know what the ownership is, for sure.
Yeah, and with that in mind, I don't know that you could deny it just based on that, for
But
example.
we should know it.
But it is something to be, I don't think it's so I guess just be aware of that. It's not necessarily something you could deny it on, but definitely something that comes into play.
It's our advantage to have independent property tax lots, period. And especially if there's 100 or 80 homes or built, living structures planned there. And we could be significantly not enough funds to cover the maintenance that we'll end up doing with snow and
Well, yeah,
their
that's
parks,
that's your
because there's
general
parks
fund.
as well.
So that's your streets, that's your staff, that's your.
But just to be that person, because it's fun to be, I guess. But we've always talked about we need low-income housing or affordable housing or whatever the other one is that they could say. But and so that kind of goes
Attainable.
Attainable, thank you. So.
And I think that's great, but I also don't think the city should take a hit in financials.
I don't either, but I just want to bring that up, that's what we voiced, that we wanted here.
Yeah.
But now that where our budget's been and so forth, it's like, well, can we be there?
Well, technically it's private property, right?
Yep.
So we wouldn't be required to plow it
Well, that's a whole other issue.
Well, that's a different
That's a
I
whole
talked
nother
about, I
issue.
wondered about
Request
that,
to
is
be,
if they had to have their own maintenance, because it is private property.
Depends how they propose.
Yeah.
But it's still under, isn't it still city property? Isn't that city property?
I
City
think-
limits.
I think to date, what I've heard is they're proposing public right of ways.
Yeah, if they're proposing public right of ways, then, yeah.
That puts us into
It's the same
maintenance,
with the park.
you know.
Right.
So,
And it's not all attainable, affordable housing.
Not even close.
Yeah,
No,
that
it's
they're
not. No, I
talking
know.
about. So
Yeah.
basically, they're putting bigger houses in there, and then those people would not necessarily, their property taxes would be lower because it's on a co-op land.
yeah, yeah.
So, yeah, it's,
You may own a
Not
smaller
local.
house here and pay more property taxes, and I'm not sure that makes a lot of sense,
Yeah.
right?
No.
You know?
No, I totally, yeah, I just,
Yeah. No, thinking right.
Sounds like this would be.
Can
agenda
I put in a word?
Absolutely.
please.
To circle back, Nolan asked, are we comfortable with this? Is that right, Nolan?
Yes.
Yeah,
I'm not.
Oh, well, there's one answer.
I can't look anybody square in the eye and say I'm actually comfortable. So,
I'm not either, but
I can.
I don't know what
So-
would make me more comfortable.
yeah, so that's, and then
I mean,
I'm glad,
not sure where
and I'm
Yeah.
glad for
will
the
be
honesty,
comfortable
thank you,
with
Jeff.
it.
Because I don't know if I am.
Let's,
I don't think
Yeah.
anybody is right now at this table.
Sorry to interrupt you, Jeff.
Yeah, I'm not sure where we're gonna be comfortable with it, or if we'll ever be comfortable with it, but, no, I'm not.
sounds like.
I'm not sure what that means, though.
I wanna live with it for a little longer. This is a lot, we've talked about a lot. Sometimes I have a slow percolator. I wanna be sure we kinda got it.
Because this is, like I said, this is the future of Roslyn's culture. It will be, it's a change. What kind of change it's gonna be, I don't know. I hope it's a good change. I always hope on the best. But is our code providing us the best change possible?
That we want.
That, yeah,
That
as
we
a
want to
city.
see out of it.
To not destroy our culture, to not totally change our culture, but to adapt into our culture. And not be ran over by, well, you don't have that in your code, so we're gonna do it.
Well, for me, I agree with Jeff. I could say I'm not 100% comfortable either, simply because of its size. You know, we're talking
Yeah.
like a 30% or more increase in the population of Roslyn, all from one development. That's huge. And so I get it. But I understand that the overlay's been in our code for a long time.
Just haven't used it.
It's just nobody came along to use it. But the way I understand it, the council has wide latitude and discretion, you know, in terms of decide what to do. So it's not, I think the code, I could be wrong, I'd like to hear the attorney, but I believe the way the code is written now is the best that we can get. In that we can tell, in other words, a lot of times codes are not subjective. They have to be direct. It has to be 5 feet here, 20 acres, you know, whatever, all these things. Here it's more like, we don't like it. I mean, we can't be that arbitrary, but there's a lot of discretion in terms of saying we don't like it.
Someone asked, do we feel protected, not comfortable by the code, I think while we percolate on this, it's really thinking about what are we protecting, maybe coming up with a list independently about like what we're protecting so we can see the code provides its protections.
When you live here 5 years, you'll totally know what we're talking about.
Yeah.
I don't mean that in a rude way by
No,
any
I
means,
mean,
but it's a
yeah.
lifestyle and it's
No,
an
you're
it's
totally
a
right.
huge, massive adjustment.
Exactly,
of
and it's a
this.
lot of people.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, it
And
is.
the population increases.
And everybody's gonna have a
Within
different
the
list
population.
and
For
why
sure.
they love Roslyn the way
Yeah.
it is. And to see something new, and like I said, when it doesn't fit, or if it doesn't fit, it won't be considered Roslyn to most people that live here. And that'll be sad,
It's gonna be sad.
So-
So what do you do?
you know?
So-
That's why we're trying to say, can we get it the best we can get?
We approved that small plat, maybe that's not
The
the.
systemic
The
plat.
systemic plat. And we didn't feel as a city that it went off as the city wanted to, because of the guidelines that were set forth. How would we feel now if the systemic plat came in front of us? Would we feel like the code's protecting us to, and again, we haven't seen the change on that, so this is just kind of up in the air question without knowing the effects of 8 houses, which wasn't, I think, right?
I think it's 6.
6 houses.
Yeah.
Not a huge
No.
dent of a change, but it's a change that's coming. But we, again, weren't happy with how it all went. Would we be happy today with what we have now? Like, would we feel okay after saying, okay, everything's set for us, systemic plat's turned in, we're protected?
So, just so you're clear though, that is a little bit of a separate process. So
Separate.
that actually was a plat. This will be
A master
a
plan.
master plan. So
Right.
and then I guess the best way to do the difference is the thing that went across from the school with all the houses,
Yeah.
that's a plat. Suncadia is a master plan development. So there's your, if that compares. I mean, it's not apples and oranges, I guess I wouldn't say,
I
but it
got you,
is
yeah.
different because when you're looking at the master plan development, you're looking at the entirety of the development itself, not just how many lots can I legally fit on this. So the requirements and the restrictions are different but the same. I guess it's you're held to a different standard in the code
With the
under
master plan.
under the master plan versus the plat.
Okay.
There's a term in development, it's called entitlement. It's not actually written into the law, but everybody uses the term. And when you have zoning and you have design guidelines, you're entitled, right? You might, instead of 10 lots, you might get 8 lots or 6 lots, but you're gonna get a plat.
Yeah.
Because that's the
Yeah.
zoning, and that's what it is. But this is more like a rezone, and rezones are not entitlements.
Gotcha, okay, okay.
And I think that one
It's a
took it.
different set of standards, but, so just to be clear.
Yeah.
I don't know that changes your question.
No, it
but-
does, yeah, it gives us a little bit more flexibility with the master plan and not the cutout plat that was already, yeah, so okay,
And that
sorry.
was a shock. I mean, that was the first development in a long time
Yeah.
of more than one home, right, in Roslyn. So I think it was a huge shocker. Like, you're developing Roslyn with 6 homes or 8 homes, right? I mean, it was the first shock in a long time
In
here.
a while, yeah.
So we second guessed, was that the right, and now we have, I take
Well,
6 houses here right now on 33 acres in
To
ours.
be fair, it was an eye opener too, because they were required to implement those development standards that are in there, and since then, we've decided maybe those aren't the development standards we necessarily wanted.
Yep,
So,
streetwise,
Yeah.
sidewalk-wise, all the above came into question just 6 months ago. I'm like, God, boy, is it gonna look too Bellevue-ish? Is it gonna be very modern and not really fit what we want? It's in a niche of a corner. It probably doesn't affect the majority of Roslyn,
Yeah.
right? But it's still part of the process.
Right there coming into town, yeah.
Well, it's behind homes, but it's still one of those, okay, is it gonna fit?
There were 2 public hearings about that the
Yep.
planning commission ran, and there were 14 things that the people who came to those hearings, and there was probably 20 people asked for, and because of have legal discussions, only 1 was used. And so there are people who live there who might feel pretty strongly about
Yep.
what's happened. So, I mean, and that's,
Oh, yeah,
but that's,
absolutely.
it's a learning thing. It's
I know
very
2 of them,
interesting.
so yes.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
So that's a zoning thing, right? If it's zoned residential and the classics, and its typical city lot is 50 by 135, that's what residential
Where you're
is.
set, yeah.
Unless there's a different zone on it. And that should be, if that's an issue, we should focus on that.
If you want bigger,
To get
less-
what we want.
Mhm. Or less density, then we increase that
Right.
size of lot.
Ironically, the previous plat in Roslyn to that one is on the other side of South.
That's right, that's right.
Where they, it's private
Yeah.
street, they've got then they had the water issue.
Yep.
Oh, yeah.
Because,
And we battled the water,
Right.
I mean, until a couple years ago, we
Same
finally
thing.
solved that water
Yeah,
problem.
right.
Wow,
It was just a lot
So
of,
those people on South are really,
not,
they're seeing,
and then we're gonna have that across the street.
Yeah.
But it sort of fits their homes also, there's a different,
yeah, I agree.
different era of
I
home.
live right there, I live
Yeah,
It's those 2 huge
yeah.
ponderosas that scare me to death.
Oh.
Those things fall over, it's gonna be a mess.
So Nolan, is it time to do your thing?
do your thing.
Was everybody good, just double check?
Is the planning commission good?
Yeah, you comfortable where we're
I
at?
think what happens depends
second
on
it,
who we
Nolan.
are. I think that's the
Exactly.
reality.
Jeff already seconded.
Planning commission's great.
planning
Jeff,
commission's
Jeff,
always
shit.
great.
Yeah, thank you for the awesome, thank you staff too.
It's nice.
Thanks for all your
Most
work.
important.
They did all the work on this one.
Yes, they did a lot of work.
But you got a lot of filtering to do, and your other
No,
jobs
yeah,
and
but-
everything else, so awesome job.
Yeah.
Yeah, really.
All right, meeting adjourned, you guys, thanks everybody.
Okay, thanks.
So we're not making a decision, we're gonna hopefully make a decision by the end of the month? Or the
No, we're gonna be
official,
done by
official?
June. Yeah, or
But-
July,
We should have-
first week, no later than the